Hello and welcome back to Waywayves. In this video, we begin in Minnesota, where Operation Metro Surge has turned the Twin Cities into a flashpoint for a national crisis. Over the past few weeks, there have been two fatal shootings involving ICE agents in Minneapolis. The most recent happened on January 24th, when federal agents shot and killed 37-year-old Alex Pretty, a U.S. citizen and ICU nurse. This came just weeks after another incident on January 7th, where an ICE officer fatally shot Minneapolis resident Renee Good, a 37-year-old mother of three, just after she dropped off her child at school. Before we go any further, you need to see what enforcement looks like on the ground. Now watch this.
Some Americans are skeptical that an ICE agent who shot dead a man in the U.S. city of Minneapolis was acting in self-defense. New videos show Alex Pretty had been disarmed and was facing away from the gun when he was fatally shot. U.S. correspondent Rob Scott is in Minneapolis.
And they keep pushing people, you know?
The shooting captured Good's SUV idling across a residential street where ICE agents were conducting an immigration operation. An officer approached her door and ordered her out. She reversed briefly, then began to drive while turning to her right, prompting the agent, since identified as Ross, to jump out of the way and fire 3 shots into the windshield and then the window as it passed.
As you're seeing on your screen, these are no border zones. These are residential neighborhoods, workplaces, and city streets. ICE has expanded their operations under a broader federal push to accelerate removals and interior enforcement. That expansion has consequences, not just legally, but also politically. As you watch this, you must have noticed the shock in the community, people filming on their phones, neighbors running out. These are not isolated. They are fueling real outrage. Now, why does this matter nationally, you may ask? It has spilled into Congress and raised the odds of a partial government shutdown by the end of this week, potentially Friday, January 30th or January 31st. The issue is funding for the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees ICE. A massive $1.2 trillion funding package passed by the House, but Senate Democrats are refusing to support it if DHS funding stays in, demanding accountability for this incident. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said bluntly, Senate Democrats would not allow the current DHS funding bill to move forward. The appalling murders of Renee Good and Alex Pretty must lead Republicans to join Democrats in overhauling ICE. Republicans holding a 53 to 47 majority won't strip out DHS funding and are pushing forward, hoping enough Democrats cross over to avoid a shutdown. But the math is tight. It needs 60 votes to beat a filibuster. Watch this clip from the Capitol Hill pressers.
There's a battle brewing on Capitol Hill and another government shutdown. Could that be looming as the latest shooting in Minneapolis intensifies the debate over Homeland Security funding? Bill Malusian, live on Capitol Hill with more. You were busy reporting over the weekend, and we were grateful to have you.
Dana, good morning to you. The threat of a partial government shutdown at the end of the month just got very, very real. As Senate Democrats say there is no way whatsoever that they're going to vote for a DHS funding bill unless it reforms ICE. The problem is that DHS bill is tied to 5 other funding bills.
First of all, of course, I'm against this spending bill.
It's our view that you should not proceed with the funding for DHS until you have in my view, radical changes, rein in ICE.
I hate shutdowns. I'm one of the people that helped negotiate the solution to the end of the last shutdown, but I can't vote for a bill that includes ICE funding under these circumstances.
Now, here's the catch. Even if a shutdown happens, the Trump administration's immigration machine is heavily insulated. Last year's Big Beautiful Bill gave ICE a $75 billion supplement on top of its $10 billion base budget. This means that while other agencies might shutter, federal agents in Minnesota may continue their operations. Analysts like Stephen March, author of the Next Civil War, are warning that what we see in Minnesota, where Governor Tim Walz has deployed the National Guard to protect citizens from federal one-sided violence, is the technical definition of a breakdown in political legitimacy. See how polarized it's become. A shutdown would affect many agencies, though DHS might be partially shielded from parafunding laws. Now, this is not just about money, it's about trust in federal law enforcement, immigration policy under the current administration, and whether states like Minnesota can push back without bigger clashes. Alright, now let's zoom in a bit more on what's happening right in Minnesota, because some people, analysts and experts, are starting to use really heavy words like this could be the start of something like a US civil war. Minnesota has these sanctuary rules in place, which basically means local police and officials do not help ICE much with immigration stuff. They limit cooperation. But right now, the federal government has ramped things up big time. They sent in a ton more agents. Reports say around 1,000 extra ICE and Border Patrol folks on top of the thousands already there for this big operation called Metro Surge. And these recent shootings, they've lit a fire under people. Protests have exploded. Crowds are gathering around ICE vehicles, blocking convoys, phones out recording everything, and the tension is thick. Pay attention to how intense it looks. People are really standing up and pushing back. Some folks are even drawing lines back to history. The governor himself brought up Minnesota's role in the Civil War, like how the state sent troops to fight against slavery back then, and is comparing the resistance today to that kind of stand. Experts have actually run simulations on this exact kind of thing. There was one back in 2024 from a group at the University of Pennsylvania, and they warned that clashes like this, where a state says no to further enforcement and things get physical, could spiral into serious conflict, even something bigger. They basically played out scenarios where states and federal forces end up facing off in a city like Minneapolis, and it did not end well. Look, nobody is saying it's definitely going to happen. It is not set in stone, but the talk is getting really heated. On one side, people are calling ICE a kind of paramilitary group acting out of control. On the other side, folks say that this is tough but needed law enforcement. Now let's watch this.
So what has happened in Minneapolis, and I think this is based on very significant, wide, and consistent reporting, is that ICE agents are using force in many instances unlawfully. And the example that you just gave, the shooting of Renee Good, is a primary example that has really ignited people. I think there can be little doubt in people's minds at this point that it was an unlawful use of force on behalf of the ICE agent that shot her. So thinking about the fact that we have federal agents who are engaging in unlawful uses of force, what is a governor supposed to do? What is Governor Walz supposed to do? He cannot stand by and watch that idly play out without doing something to protect his citizens. He has put the National Guard on notice. They are on standby and they are ready to mobilize if need be. The president has meanwhile readied federal forces in Alaska and is threatening to send those into Minnesota. So it's a perfect setup for a conflict between the National Guard and federal forces, in this case, the 11th Airborne. And that was more or less the situation that we had imagined and predicted could occur in our tabletop exercise.
Like you said, Claire, it's kind of a perfect storm, these conditions that are being met that are so similar to the simulation that your team ran. Let's speak a little bit about the rule of law here and how it applies to the armed forces specifically.
You can refuse illegal orders.
You can refuse illegal orders.
You must refuse illegal orders.
Claire, these are statements by U.S. senators and members of the U.S. Congress who were either formerly military or formerly members of the intelligence community, speaking directly to current members of the military, to current intelligence officers via social media. How does that play into this scenario that we're discussing?
So let's be clear about what that video said and what it didn't say. What it said was black letter law. something that would be taught at any military academy, taught at any national security law class. It's what I teach my students, which is that members of the military have a duty not to carry out illegal orders. If you're sure that you have received an illegal order, not only can you disobey, but you must disobey and report that up the chain of command. Now, why is it relevant in this situation? It's relevant because if federal forces are called out, such as the 11th Airborne, to Minnesota, they will be engaged to back up ICE agents. And if ICE agents are behaving unlawfully, then that is an unlawful order. And as a member of the military, you cannot come in and use force to ensure that a federal agent has the ability to carry out an illegal act. So if ICE is engaging in shooting protesters in the legs, or ripping people out of their cars, or shooting women who have just dropped their kids off at daycare and are not threatening them through the windshield of their cars and killing them, federal forces cannot back up those agents without engaging in an illegal activity. And they cannot lawfully carry out any orders to back up ICE agents. And meanwhile, we will have the Minnesota National Guard, who will be there to protect police officers and citizens who will be potentially peacefully exercising their First Amendment rights to protest, for example. And if those are the facts on the ground, and they may or may not be when and if this should occur, then the Minnesota National Guard will be constitutionally and otherwise lawfully in the right, and they will have the right to carry out the governor's orders.
Now you've seen how they're explaining it. It's eye-opening to see just how fragile things can get when trust between the federal government and the states breaks down like this. And why should the rest of us care, even here in Nigeria or anywhere else? Because when the US is this divided inside, it shakes everything. Global trade gets unpredictable, alliances shift, migration rules change overnight, it ripples out to the whole world. So this is something to definitely look out for. All right, now let's head south for a minute and talk about what's happening in Mexico right now, because this is a big trade move that's got everyone paying attention. As of January 1st, 2026, just a few weeks ago, Mexico started applying new tariffs of up to 50% on imports coming from China and other countries that do not have a free trade agreement with them. We're talking about 1,463 different product categories getting hit. That includes things like cars, especially electric vehicles like brands like BYD, textiles, clothing, steel, footwear, furniture, plastics, toys, appliances, and many more. For vehicles specifically, that 50% rate is a real jump from what was there before, which was often around 15 to 20% in recent years for those non-FTA sources. Now let's take a look at this.
Mexico's tariffs of up to 50% on Chinese products are good news for this shoe factory in León. They say they've long been undercut by Chinese competition.
This problem affects all types of companies, small, medium, family-run, artisanal, so I think we'll all benefit.
But is that the real reason that Mexico slapped tariffs on the Asian superpower? Analysts say it has more to do with pressure from next door, the United States, by far Mexico's biggest trading partner. President Trump's long worried that the country is a backdoor for Chinese goods to get into the North American Free Trade Zone, which Mexico shares with the US and Canada. The country's been under pressure to do something about it, although President Sheinbaum denied its appeasement.
We have great respect for China and very good relations with them. The reason for these adjustments to the law has to do with strengthening the national economy.
Her government says the tariffs will help Mexican industry develop and save 350,000 jobs.
You can see why local manufacturers like the shoe and auto parts makers in León are actually welcoming this. They say it's protecting jobs that have been under pressure from super cheap imports. So why are they doing this? Officially, the government under President Claudia Sheinbaum is calling it part of Plan Mexico, their big push for what they call sovereign, sustainable reindustrialization. The idea is to boost how much stuff is actually made in Mexico. They are targeting a noticeable increase in domestic content, like 15% more in key sectors over time, create a bunch of good jobs. Some estimates tie this to protecting or adding hundreds or thousands in manufacturing and bring in extra revenue for the government, around 70 billion pesos a year, which is roughly $3.76 to $3.8 billion. Now, the big question everyone is asking is this just straight up trade protection to help Mexican factories and workers, or is there some pressure from the United States behind it? Well, Mexico's official line is clear. They say this isn't targeted at any one country. It is about reducing reliance on imports from places without trade deals and building up their own industry. And yeah, that makes sense on its own. It is classic protectionism to shield local jobs and production. But the timing, it is hard to ignore. This all lines up right before the big USMCA review coming up in 2026, the trade agreement between the US, Mexico, and Canada. The US has been really vocal about not wanting Chinese goods to sneak into North America through Mexico as a backdoor to avoid American tariffs. Analysts and reports are pointing out that this move helps Mexico look like it's cooperating, curbing transshipment issues while keeping things smooth with Washington. President Sheinbaum and her team have denied it's purely about US pressure, but it definitely aligns with those concerns. On the flip side, critics, business groups, economists are already warning about downsides. That is, higher prices for everyday stuffs like clothes, toys, electronics, and potential disruption in supply chains for companies that rely on those Asian parts. It could push some inflation, even if the goal is long-term strength for Mexican industry. You can see the classic trade-off. Protecting local jobs and factories feels great for some, but it risks making things more expensive for consumers and businesses down the line. So yeah, it is a mix. Real protection for Mexico's economy, but the US angle is very much in the conversation as well. Now, shifting gears to another trade story, which is India and the European Union. They have finally locked in a massive free trade agreement after nearly 20 years of talks. EU President Ursula and India's Trade Minister Piyush Goyal are calling it the mother of all deals, and when you see the details, you will get why. It wipes out or seriously cuts tariffs on about 96.6% of EU goods heading into India, with phased reductions especially on cars, wine, spirits, and other high-value items. In return, the EU is opening up almost 99.5% of its market to Indian exports over time. Think garments, pharmaceuticals, leather, textiles, marine products, chemicals, steel, you name it. India also gets back some of that lost GSP access from before 2023, which should give those exports a serious lift. Watch this footage right here.
India and the European Union have agreed a landmark trade agreement after nearly 2 decades of on-off negotiations. The wide-ranging deal will see a number of huge tariff cuts and a joint security partnership. Calling it historic, the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the agreement would create a free trade zone of 2 billion people. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi said people across the world will be discussing it as the mother of all deals.
You see how big this market is. 2 billion people coming together. And check out the timing too. It is perfect. This lands right as US tariffs under Trump are ramping up and threats are coming toward India too. For India, this is a smart move to spread out its trade partners, soften any shocks from the US, and build rock-solid ties with Europe. The EU gets huge wins too. India's economy is growing fast, on track to overtake Japan in GDP soon. So this opens up a massive market. Plus, it helps Europe cut down on dependency on China for supply chains. Leaders are saying this creates a free trade zone for about a quarter of the world's population. It's a real geopolitical win in a world where tariffs are popping up everywhere. Now, a humanitarian focus, because this one is tough but important. The UN and its partners working with the Somalia government just launched their 2026 humanitarian needs and response plan yesterday. They are asking for $852 million to help 2.4 million people who are in real crisis. This number is actually down from last year's appeal, not because things are better, but because funding has become so short. In 2025, they only got about 27% of what they asked for, so this year's target is more realistic, even if the needs are still intense and huge. We are talking severe drought, failed rains, dried up water sources, livestock dying, rising hunger, plus ongoing conflicts, disease outbreaks as well, like cholera and climate shocks piling on. Watch this, please.
The United Nations has announced the launch of an $852 million humanitarian needs and response plan for Somalia. The plan is 40% less than last year and aims to support 2.4 million people in Somalia.
Our humanitarian colleague said this year's plan calls for 852 million United States dollars, which is 40% less than last year. It aims to support 2.4 million people, which is less than half of the people in need of humanitarian assistance, leaving significant gaps in essential services. Our humanitarian colleagues stress it is important to note that this reduction in the funding we're appealing for is due to constrained resources, not reduced humanitarian needs.
You see those high-risk areas on screen. They are targeting 1.6 million people in the worst spots with the most urgent needs. And the focus is on life-saving basics, which is food, water, nutrition, healthcare, protection from violence, and cash to help families cope. It is also a call for everyone to step up, not just quick aid, but longer-term stuff linking development and peace to fix root causes. This really matters because when funding falls short, it means fewer people get rich in on one of the most fragile places on earth. It hits home how climate change and conflict keep making suffering worse for millions. Heartbreaking, but shining a light on it is the very first step. Back to some brighter economic news from the continent. Just 3 days ago, on January 24th, Libya signed a major 25-year oil deal with France's Total Energies and the US's ConocoPhillips, working through their joint venture with Waha Oil Company. This one is huge, over $20 billion in investment to seriously boost production, targeting up to 850,000 extra barrels per day. That is a big leap from the current 340 to 400,000 barrel per day in those fields. If everything goes smoothly, it is projected to bring in more than $376 billion in net revenues for Libya over the life of the deal. Watch the signing visuals right here.
Libya has signed a 25-year oil deal with France's Total Energy and US-based ConocoPhillips involving more than $20 billion of foreign investments. Prime Minister Abdulhamid Al-Deiba announced the new agreement during the Libya Energy and Economy Summit in Tripoli on Saturday. The deal was signed through Waha Oil Company, a subsidiary of Libya's state-run National Oil Corporation.
We will do our best to bring in the green fields and then also to focus on the brown fields as part of the production enhancement.
In a country that has faced so much instability, a reliable long-term energy deal, updating old infrastructure, opening new wells, bringing in top global players like this could really help steady the economy and bring in consistent money. In a region that is often volatile, these kinds of partnerships are a big deal. Now closer to home, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu departed Abuja on January 26th for a 2-day state visit to Turkey at the invitation of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The agenda is packed, deepening cooperation in security, trade, education, innovation, aviation, energy, and even military ties. They are expecting to sign several MOUs, memorandums of understanding, and there's a business forum lined up too. This isn't just any trip, it is a full state visit, the first by a Nigerian president to Ankara in quite some time, and it is reciprocal to when Erdogan came to Nigeria back in October 2021. This is about building a mutually beneficial partnership in a world that is more multipolar, where Nigeria needs diverse allies for economic growth and security. The highlights will be high-level bilateral talks between President Tinubu and President Erdogan, plus meetings with other senior officials. Check out these clips for preparations, aims, and statements.
Moving on now. Nigeria is broadening its foreign policy lens, not by breaking from the West, but by widening the field. And this week, that shift points east, to Ankara. President Tinubu has departed Abuja for a 2-day visit to Turkey. Security, trade, and strategic cooperation are at the top of the agenda. Nigerian officials also say multiple agreements are expected to be signed between the two presidents.
The agenda will include meetings between high-ranking officials of both nations and the signing of memoranda of understanding in scientific research, energy, technical cooperation, media and communications, military cooperation and protocol, among others. A business forum will bring together investors from both countries to explore areas of interest during the visit.
And this visit reciprocates Turkish President Erdogan's trip to Nigeria in 2021. But analysts say the context today is very different, because this time security is at the centre. Nigeria remains under a nationwide security emergency declared in November 2025. Terror groups like Boko Haram and ISWAP continue attacks in the northeast. Banditry and mass kidnappings plague the northwest, and transnational crime stretches across Nigeria's borders. Analysts say this pressure is shaping foreign policy choices, and that is where Turkey enters the frame. The shift is already visible on the ground. Along the Abuja-Kaduna line, highway officials say the route was once notorious for kidnappings and ambushes. But today, Turkish-made drones and armoured vehicle patrols this route, making it much safer. Officials say the deployments reflect a growing security partnership, focused on surveillance and rapid response. And the most recent Ankara visit is expected to deepen defence cooperation even further. However, here's the strategic tension. Turkey is NATO, but analysts say it does not behave like a typical Western ally. Ankara sells drones to Ukraine and keeps channels open with Moscow. It hosts NATO assets while cutting energy deals with Russia. Experts say that ambiguity is the attraction. For Nigeria, it means flexibility without formal alignment. This shift comes as Washington is also deepening its engagement with Abuja.
Analysts emphasize that security concerns currently dominate the context of this partnership, as Nigeria grapples with ongoing terrorism and crime. Turkish drones and armored vehicles are already enhancing security on key routes. Meanwhile, Turkey's flexible stance as a NATO member offers Nigeria various options without strict alignment. The visit signals Nigeria's intention to diversify its economic partnerships, with Turkish trade surpassing $1 billion annually. Pay attention to how this kind of deals can open real doors. Better access to Turkish investment in our infrastructure, joint efforts on counter-terrorism, scholarship or training programs for Nigerians, maybe even booster trade in areas like agriculture, textiles, or construction, which Turkey is already a big player in those. The presidency's special advisors have called this strategic, anchored on shared interests with tangible outcomes expected. Details on exactly what gets signed will come out after the talks wrap up today or tomorrow, but the goal is very clear, which is to strengthen Nigeria's foreign policy options, enhance our security, and create more economic opportunities in tough global times. As we come to the end of this video, you can see how everything ties together. A world that is moving fast, with US tensions, trade deals shifting alliances, humanitarian crisis calling for help, energy winds bringing hope, and diplomatic trips opening new doors. From right here in Lagos and in Africa, it reminds us that these global stories aren't far away. They hit our prices at the market, our security, and our opportunities. My name is Christopher Chukwu, and this is Waywayves. So make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.